Hey everyone, it's Mike Mangialardi from Coding Artist here, and I wanted to do an exciting video tutorial since we have the Nintendo Switch releasing very soon. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making this Nintendo Switch pure CSS image that you can see on the right hand of the screen. Now I've already made this and done a speed art video, but I wanted to break this down as an actual video tutorial so we can make this piece by piece. Now if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you go listen to my other video called A Beginner's Guide to Pure CSS Images. Now that is linked into the description, and that's going to be the foundation for this tutorial. However, I'll try to do my best to be as clear and precise as possible when explaining how I'm going to be making this Nintendo Switch. Now to start off, I'm going to go ahead and get the background for my image. So to get the background, I'm going to be using a tool called ColorZilla. ColorZilla is a Chrome plugin where I can highlight over an image in a browser and extract the colors that I need. So I just want this blue background, so I'm going to set the body equal to that background color, like so. Alright, so we got our background. Now the next thing that I like to do is I like to just start declaring all the classes that I think I'm going to need in this image. So I'm breaking down an image into more specific shapes, and in terms of HTML, it's going to be in different classes. So let me get started with that. First, we're going to need a box. Now you can't see the box, but the box is going to be the invisible container for this image. And the reason that's important is because all of the positioning and the sizing for everything you see in this image is going to be based off of a percentage. So by having a container, it makes things much easier. And also, as you can see, this is optimized for being mobile responsive because I can simply resize my box container, and because everything is nested under that and positioned by percentage, it'll automatically adjust. So the first thing I'm going to need is the outer container, which is going to be the box. Then I'm going to have the switch container. So this is just going to be a rectangular container that's going to hold the actual Nintendo Switch. And this is going to be inside the box. And because our image is, a very clear rectangle and everything's stacked on top of a rectangle, it makes sense to have another container like this. So after we have the switch container, we're going to have the Joy-Con left. And we're also going to have our Joy-Con right, of course. And these should both be nested under switch container like that. And then we're also going to have a screen. So those are the major components that are going to be part of this pure CSS image. So I like to start there, and then we can go back and add more classes once we have the major components. So with these complete, let's go ahead and start writing the CSS. So for our box, we're going to want this to be positioned relative, and we want it to be centered. So I'm going to do display block margin auto, which is going to center it. Now I just want to drop this down a little bit, so let's drop it down by 8%. And so we can see it, let's make it a background of white. Lastly, we'll need to define a height of 400 pixels and a width of 600 pixels, like so. Alright, so there we have the container that's going to hold our switch. So let's go ahead and write the switch container. So this is going to be position absolute. So we're going to position it based on percentage. So let's give it a width of 80% and a height of 60%. Now I'm going to make the background red so we can see this very clearly. So to get our left and top, our top is going to be 100 minus 60 divided by 2. So our top is going to be 20%. Then for our left, it's going to be 100 minus 80% divided by 2, which gives us 10%. And that is the formula if you want to center something right in the middle with percentages. Alright, so we have the switch container right in the middle. That looks good. Now I'm going to go back and make this a background of none. And just so we can see it throughout the tutorial still, I'll make it a border of whites, and then we'll remove this at the end. Alright, so now we have our switch container, which is right in the middle, and let's give this the same shape as our Joy-Cons. So I'm just going to extract that and paste it in like so. Alright, so we have our switch container, which is going to have one Joy-Con, one screen, and our right Joy-Con. So probably the easiest place to start is going to be with our Joy-Con left, so let's write that. So we want our Joy-Con to be positioned absolute, so that means we're going to control it based on percentage. And because it's nested under switch container, the percentages are going to be relative to switch container and not to box. So we have Joy-Con left. This is going to be a height of 100% of our container. And let's do it with about 15%. And then so we can see this will make this a background of red. Alright, so there we can see we have our Joy-Con left correctly placed. Now we want it to be the same color as this background, so we can just leave it as so. And it's going to be hard to see how exactly this looks like until we get our screen. But next what we need to do is let's round out the border. Again, we won't be able to see this until we do our screen, but let's round the border down and let's round it by 20 pixels. So this is going to curve the edges. However, we don't want to curve all of the edges. We just want to curve the top left and the top right. So we'll specify that. And actually, to make things even easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this switch container be a color of none. And now we should be able to see it. Alright, so there we have our Joy-Con left, and it looks like it has the curvature like we want. So let's go ahead and just copy this. And we're going to do the same thing for our right. The only thing that's going to change is we're going to give it a right of 0%. And we're going to switch this from top left to top right, and from bottom left to bottom right. So now we have the same Joy-Cons for the left and for the right, and those look good. Now let's go ahead and write the screen. So the screen's going to be a background of none. And for our width, we have to look at our Joy-Cons. So our Joy-Cons together are both taking 15%. So combine those, it's going to be taking up a width of 30%. Now we want the screen to be everything else. So that's going to be 70%. And for our left, we can do 100 minus 70 divided by 2, which is 15%. And let's give this a background of black. And it's also going to have a height of 100%. And we forgot to specify position absolute. And now we can see it is working correctly. So we have our Joy-Cons and we have our screen. Now this is kind of the outer border of the screen. We want the actual inner screen. So let's just do screen inner. And I'm going to specify this as screen outer to clear up any confusion. Alright, so this is going to be very similar, so I'm just going to copy and paste this. We want it to be a height and width that's just slightly less than our screen outer. And so we can do width of 90%, a height of 90%, and then for our background, let me get this color, like so. And then our left is going to be 5%, and our top is going to be 5%. Alright, so now we have a Nintendo Switch inner screen on top of everything else, and we're eventually going to be putting on our Nintendo Switch logo and doing some animation there, as you can see on the demo on the right. However, before we get to that, let's do all of these buttons on the Joy-Con. So we want these to be positioned according to our Joy-Cons. So let me indent from Joy-Con left. And what we're going to have is first we're going to have an analog left. And we're going to have a D-pad, which is going to be a container. So let me specify that. Then we'll have D-pad top, D-pad left, D-pad right, and we'll have a D-pad bottom. And then we're also going to have a square button right here. So I'm going just to put square button. All right, so that's sweet. We've got a container for our D-pad and an analog left. And then we're going to have another button up here, but we'll get to that later. So let's start off by doing the analog left. So our analog left is also going to be position absolute. And we want this to be a circle, so we do border radius 50%. Now for our background, let's just leave it for black, and we'll get the more precise colors later. Now we need to define a height, so let's try a height of 10% and a width of 10%, and we'll see what that gives us. Alright, so first it's not nearly wide enough, so let's make this a width of 30%. And there we see we have something like we want. Now I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, just using trial and error. So let's move this to 13%. And there we have the analog left like we want. So now let's position this. So let's try a top of 10% and a left of 15%. And so it's not quite nearly to the left, so I'll move it over more. So let's keep trying. Alright, that looks about right. So let's drop it down just a little bit more though. And then we see that's going to be in the spot that we want. And alright, so we've got our analog left, but it's kind of hard to see here, but we have a darker black circle and an outer black circle. So let's just give this a border. And we're going to make it solid, 3 pixels. Now let's grab the background color for that and paste it in here. And now we can see we have the effect we want, except I messed up and put it for our background, but I want that for our border, and then we want our background to be black. And now I'm going to change this to 6 pixels. And there we can see it a little bit better. Actually, I'm going to drop it down to 5. Alright, so there, that looks about right. But now what I need to do is reposition this. So let's move it over to the left more. Until we get it just about right. There we go. So there we have our analog left, and that looks about right. So let's go on and move to our D-pad container. Alright, so our D-pad container is also going to be position absolute, and we just want to make a rectangle that's going to be a container. So let's do height 20%, width 30%, 40%, and we'll do a background of white so we can see this. Alright, so I'm going to position it vertically, and then I'm going to worry about resizing this. So let's do top 40%. And we want it a little bit lower, so let's try top 50%, pardon me, 45%, and that looks about right. Now this needs to be a little wider, so let's do a width of 45%. And it still needs to be wider, so we do 50. Let's try 60. And there we see that is about right. We might need to be a little bit longer. Alright, so let's do 70. Alright, so we have a width of 70%, and that gives us the width that we want. So let's make this a little taller while we're at it. But not quite that tall. And there we go. So we have a height of 23% and a width of 70%, and that gives us the D-pad container that we want. Now I need to center this. So let's do left of 15%. And now we see it's in the middle, and that looks right. Alright, so let's make this a background of none. And now we're going to have our D-pad top, which is now going to be positioned according to this container because we see it's nested under D-pad container. Alright, so this is going to be position absolute as well. And let's do a height of 10% and a width of 10%. And we want this to be black. And I'm going to do a border radius 50% to make it a circle. And now we can see that it's far too small. So let's try 30 and 30. There we see that is more like what we want. Now let's make this centered. So we do 100 minus 30, which is 70 divided by 2, which is 35%. And we want this right on top because it is our D-pad top. So we do top of 0%. So there we see we have our D-pad top. Now our bottom is going to be pretty similar, except we're going to just be doing a bottom instead of a top. So that's pretty easy. Now let's go ahead and let's do our D-pad left and our D-pad right. So D-pad left is just going to be dropped down a little bit. And now we want it a left of 0%. And there we see we have it in the right spot. So we could do the same thing for D-pad right, just switching our left and right values. So I'll rename this to right. And I'll rename this from left to 0% to right to 0%. And there we go, we have our D-pad. So that is looking good. The next thing is going to be our square button, which is going to be this right here. So this is going to be easy. So we do square button, also position absolute. And let's get this from the bottom. So we'll do a bottom of 15%. We'll do a right of 5%. And let's do a height of 10% and a width of 30%. And let's give this a background of black. And looks like we misspelled width, so let me adjust that. Alright, so that is now looking right, and that's because we have it nested under D-pad container, but it should be nested right under Joy-Con left. So let's fix that. So I'll delete it 2 spaces. And now we see that that looks more like what we want. I'm going to make this a little bit more over to the left and do a right of 10%. And this needs to be a little bit smaller, so let's fiddle around with our height and width. Alright, that looks about right. Let me just move it a little bit over to the left. And I'm going to leave it right there. Alright, so we have everything we need for that. The last thing we're going to have for our Joy-Con is going to be this button right here. So let's do ellipse button. Alright, so let's do ellipse button in our CSS. This is going to be position absolute. And it's going to be a height of 10%. And let's try a width of 30%. We also want this to be a background of black. And we want this to be rounded out on the edges. So we'll do border radius 50 pixels. Alright, so our height and width is off. We need to have a height of 5%. And a width of 10%. Should be even smaller. Let's do 2% and a width of 50%. And now let's move this down a little bit. So we'll do top 10%. And let's move this from the right. So we do right 5%. Alright, so it needs to be a little bit higher. So we'll do top 8%. And it needs to be a little bit more height. So we do that. And I have border radius spelled wrong, so that is causing an issue. And there we go. Now let's make the width a little bit less. And so we'll move it down till we get what we want. Alright, there. That looks about right. We have our ellipse button. We did a height of 3%, a width of 30%, and we fiddled around to get it right where we want. So it looks like our Joy-Con left is absolutely done. Alright, so let's move over to our Joy-Con right, and we're going to have a lot of the same. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Now, the only thing that we don't want is we don't have an ellipse button. And for our D-pad container, we're going to specify between left and right because they have different height positions on each side, so we can't just copy it over directly. So we'll have to specify a D-pad container of left and a D-pad container of right. And so let's go here in our D-pad container and update the title to D-pad container left. All right, so now we have to do a D-pad container right. As we see, it's off. So let's switch this to right. And now that looks about right. Now what we need to do is also change this from analog right, and that should go away. Okay. So this looks right. We just need to have our D-pad container right a little bit higher up. So let's just change it from a top of 45% to 25%. And we'll just make it 20. And there, that looks just about right. All right, so now we've done our D-pad container right. Let's do our analog right. And we could do this very similar to our analog left, but we'll just have to adjust this for the specific positioning on the right side. So we do analog right. And we're going to have this be below our D-pad container. So let's try a height of 40%. And we need a little bit more room, so let's try 45%. And we still need a little bit more room, so let's do top of 50%. All right, so there we have our analog right position right where we want it. So we can leave that there for now. Now let's go ahead and add this button up here, and then we'll have another button down here. So let's do this button right here on our right Joy-Con that's on the top left corner. So let's call this D-pad 2. So we have our D-pad 2. And we're going to make this a container, so I'm going to specify container. And then we're going to have a D-pad 2 vertical and a D-pad 2 horizontal. All right, so D-pad 2 container is also going to be position absolute. Let's give this a background of white so we can see it once it's made. And let's do a height of 8% and a width of 15%. And then let's do top of 3% and a left of 3%. All right, so that looks about right, but we just need to make it a little bit wider. So let's do a height of 20%. And let's go with 25. And there, that looks just about right. However, we're going to move this over to the left a little bit more. So let's change it to left of 8%. And there we have our D-pad 2 container. Now I'm going to make this a background of none. And then we can go ahead and style our D-pad 2 vertical. So our D-pad 2 vertical is also going to be position absolute. And we want it to be a height of 100%, a background of black. And let's do a width of 20%. So we want this to be a little bit wider, so let's do 40%. And not quite that wide, so let's do 35%. And there, that looks about right. So to get our left value to center this, we are going to have to do 100 minus 35 divided by 2, which is going to be, let's see here, actually to think about this, 65 divided by 2 is 32.5%. All right, so we have our D-pad 2 vertical. Now let's do our horizontal, which is going to be very similar, except we are switching our height for our width, and our width for our height, and our left for our top. And there we can see we have our D-pad 2 positioned just like that, and that looks right. Now let's go ahead and do our other button, which is going to be right below our analog right. So we can name this circle button right. All right, so this is going to be actually very similar to our analog. So let me find the code for analog right. And then I'm just going to resize this and reposition it. All right, so let's do a top, or pardon me, let's do a bottom of 10% and a left of 10%. Now let's resize this. So this should be 20, and let's try 5. It's still a bit too wide, so let's do 5 and 15%. And we can make this probably a little bit smaller, so let's do 3 and 10. And there, that looks about right. Now let's just make this a little bit higher up. So we'll do bottom 20%. And let's do 18%. And that puts it kind of in the right place that we want. All right, so sweet. We have completed our entire Nintendo Switch. And now I can go ahead and get rid of this border. The last thing we're going to need to add is our actual Switch icon. So I'm going to look up a Nintendo Switch logo so I can have a better idea of how I should make this. Alright, so here we have our Nintendo Switch logo. Let's go ahead and create this. Let's find our inner screen, which is right here. And we're going to have the logo nested underneath screen inner. And so let's do logo left. And then we'll do logo right. All right, so what we need is we need a rectangle that's going to have a thick border and it's going to be rounded on the top left and the bottom left. So let's go ahead and start writing that. So we're going to have logo left, which we'll do position absolute. And let's give this a height of 80%. And a width of 20%, and then we'll do the left of 40%, and a top of 10%. Now let's do background white. All right, so now we want to move a little bit over to the left, and maybe not that much. Now I don't want this to be so tall, so let's adjust our height to 60%, and that means we'll also have to adjust our top. There, that looks right. For now, let's just leave it like this, and let me adjust the colors. I had it backwards. So our background should be the same as our screen inner. So let me copy that. And then we're just going to have a border that's going to be white. So I'm going to do border solid 6 pixels white. And there we see we have the thick border we want. Let's make it a little bit thicker and make it 8 pixels of thickness. And I'm going to also adjust this so it's not as far down now. So there, that looks about right. Maybe 16%. There. Now let's round out our border top left radius. And let's do 30 pixels. And we'll do the same thing for our bottom left. And that looks about right. So now we could do the same thing for our logo right and just make updates where we need to. So we'll rename this from logo left to logo right. We'll change this from a left to right value. And then we want our border to be this color. And we want our background to be white. And then the other change we'll need is this is going to have to be a border top right radius. And we'll have to also make it a bottom width right radius. And there shouldn't be this width right here. So let's get rid of that. There we go. So that looks right. Now the issue is that we have our border here that is white and we have a border here that's red, so we can't see it. So let's make this a border of white. And there we see that that is correct. So now let's make this a little bit smaller. So let's do a width of 18%. And we could probably do 16. Then we'll change the same thing for our logo left to a width of 16%. And there we have our logo for our Nintendo Switch that looks about right. The next thing we'll need is our logo ball left. and our logo ball right. All right, so this is going to be a circle. So we do position absolute. We'll do border radius 50% to make it a circle. And for this left one, we want it to be a background of white. And let's do height 20%, width 20%, and see what that gives us. All right, so this needs to be a little bigger, so let's try a width of 40%. And let's just do 50%. That looks right. Now let's give this a top of 15%. And let's do a left of 5%. Pardon me, 25%. Okay, there we have our logo ball left looking right. So let's do the same thing for our logo ball right. And we're going to change this from top to bottom. And we want this to be the same color as our screen inner. So let me find that. And I'm going to update that here. All right, there we go. We have our Nintendo Switch logo, and it's looking awesome. So the next thing we'll have to do is we want to have some animation with our logo ball left and our logo ball right. So I'm going to put in an animation statement. And we're going to say, move it left. And this is going to last 3 seconds. Or let's do 2 seconds. And we want this to repeat infinitely. So I could do the same thing for my logo ball right, except I'm going to have a specific animation for the right. So let's go ahead and write this CSS animation. So we'll do at keyframes to define our animation, and our name was move it left. And so what we want to do is from 0% to 100% of the animation. So 0% being 0 seconds into the animation and 100% being 2 seconds into the animation. We want it to move from the top to the bottom and then back to the top. So we'll actually need to have a third percentage. So we'll do 50%. So we'll have from 0% to 50%, it's going to move to the bottom. And then from 50% to 100%, it'll move back to the top. So let's make sure that we're changing our CSS value so it's moving. So how we do that is our logo ball left is being positioned by a top percentage. So we can just adjust this top percentage. So to start off, it's at a top of 15%. Now we want it to hit about 80% top when we hit halfway through our animation. And then we'll return it back to 15% at the end. So let's see how this looks. So there we see we have our animation running smoothly. Now let's do the same thing for our move it right. Except we're going to change this to bottom. And it should be doing the reverse of move it left. Alright guys, so that is it. We have our Nintendo Switch with our animated logo running, and this is all done with pure CSS. So if you're interested in making more pure CSS images, we actually have a free email challenge called Daily CSS Images. It's a 50-day challenge where you'll get a drawing prompt sent to your inbox so you can create fun things such as a Nintendo 2DS, zombies, vampires, and much, much more. Again, it's a 100% free email challenge sent straight to your inbox, and you can check that out by looking in the description. It's going to be called Daily CSS Images Challenge. Thanks so much, guys. It also has some handy links in the description. Make sure to check them out, and we'll see you next time.